Hey everyone, I hope you're well. This is the story about what if Naruto formed a Jinchuuriki Alliance. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. So without any further ado, let's start the what if. Hello, Otudo. When Sasuke heard the voice of the sole person responsible for annihilating the entirety of his clan, he snapped out of the trance-like state that he was in and let out a roar. A gust of wind blew around him as he focused all of his chakra into his hand. The shocks of untamed electricity swarmed around his fist and he leapt into action, eager to slam the Chidori straight into Itachi's chest. He wanted to rupture his heart like Sasuke's heart was ruptured after the Uchiha massacre. He wanted to murder his brother. Who does he think he is? Sasuke thought angrily as he extended his arm. The expression on Itachi's face, a small smile gracing his lips as his eyes were filled with boredom, it made Sasuke want to murder him. Sasuke didn't even notice the flash of silver in his way. He was held by his wrist as the chakra of his Chidori dissipated. He was left pulling and trying to tear away his hand roughly, but Kakashi didn't let him move an inch. For an older man, he was still as strong as he was in his prime. Sasuke. Kakashi spoke, standing his ground against Sasuke's screams and cries for him to let go so he could kill him. I need to kill him, Kakashi. I need to fulfill my revenge. Sakura covered her mouth with her hand in shock at the situation, and Naruto was standing, frozen, glancing from Itachi, to Sasuke, to Jiraiya, and back to Itachi. Kakashi shook his head. Shinobi need to pay attention to their surroundings, Sasuke. Sasuke pulled his hand back and stared at the sight before him. He did as Kakashi asked automatically, and his jaw dropped slightly as he became even more confused. Why are you here? Itachi chuckled. Oh, my foolish little brother. Don't you fucking call me that. Sasuke snapped, itching to bring chakra in his hand again and create another Chidori just to wipe that smug expression off from Itachi's face. Hiruzen pursed his lips and sighed. I think you all need to sit down. Sasuke clenched his teeth. Not before you explain why Konoha's biggest traitor is in your office. He walked forward, ignoring the curious expression from Itachi, and slammed his hand down on the desk. Talk. Naruto pulled Sasuke away from the front and placed both hands on his shoulders. He leaned forward. Look, it's not only you who has questions. I want to know why there's an unconscious member of the Akatsuki in the corner, and your brother, another member of the Akatsuki whose sole aim is to kill all of the Jinchuriki, here. He started whispering to Sasuke. The Uzumaki pushed his own calming blue chakra slowly into Sasuke's pores and watched him visibly relax. It was a technique that he used occasionally, and what Jonin used on their subordinates to help with the after effects of being overwhelmed with killing intent. Naruto stopped releasing his chakra. But first, you'll do well to pull yourself together, he said harshly. You don't want to look weak in front of Itachi. He paused, do you? That sentence made something click in Sasuke's mind as he agreed. No, he didn't want to look weak. He hated looking weak. He would never look weak in front of his bastard of a brother. Sasuke exhaled and pushed Naruto's hands off from his shoulders, watching as the blonde Jinchuriki nodded to Sakura as they all sat in some chairs that Kotetsu awkwardly brought at the command of the Hokage. Kinda want to thank Naruto for the ramen that he brought me earlier, kinda don't think it's the time for pleasantries. The gatekeeper thought to himself, leaving the ninja to it. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, who was widely known as the Professor, suddenly didn't know how to start the conversation. He cleared his throat. Let's get right to it. At Sasuke's expectant glance and Naruto's raised eyebrow, he began. Itachi is a double agent. Double agents don't usually massacre their own clan. Sasuke cut in, leaning his head on his hand and letting his eye twitch. Itachi nodded. Usually, they don't. Sasuke didn't want to hear his voice, but begrudgingly turned his head and met his brother's eyes. Our father was going to help lead a rebellion against the Hokage. Well, that was news to Team 7. Sasuke scoffed. No, he wasn't, you're lying. He said with an edge. I'm not. Itachi replied simply, I was ordered to stop the rebellion at any cost, and they were beyond hope. Sasuke wasn't having it. He didn't think that Itachi was lying completely. By the expectant expressions by Jiraiya, Kakashi and Hiruzen, they were clearly already aware of this. But it was a bad reason to kill his whole family. What about mother? The younger Uchiha questioned, feeling heated once again before Naruto placed a hand on his thigh to calm him down. What about the Uchiha civilians? Itachi looked to the side. They all had their part to play. He looked back at his brother sadly. Would you rather live with a family full of traitors, or have a single traitor for a brother? Sasuke thought about that. It just wasn't good enough. He was emotionally exhausted with everything that was just revealed. He just sighed and ran a hand through his onyx hair, and his eyes wavered but rested on, again, his brother's gaze. What I would rather is to not be an orphan. He wanted to just fold into himself and disappear and not deal with this lie that he had been told for so long. What I would rather have is my brother to not abandon me and not tell me why. Itachi felt his heart break at the helpless expression that Sasuke was showing. He clenched his hand and swallowed thick saliva. We don't all get what we want, little brother. He glanced out of the window. Orders were orders. There was silence in the room for a bit until Naruto cleared his throat. Itachi Uchiha, he spoke, I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. He introduced himself. Itachi nodded in greeting, I'm aware of your identity. I assure you, I mean no harm. This one's on me and sensei. Jiraiya laughed awkwardly. Itachi fuels my information network on the Akatsuki. We needed him to infiltrate and join them, so we were up to date on their activity. Why do you think that none of the Jinchuuriki have been captured yet? Itachi questioned, showing how important his role was. Really? Naruto raised an eyebrow, then crossed his legs and shoved a thumb towards Kisame. So, who's he? Sakura giggled as the tension decreased and they all glanced at the hunk of blue in the corner, noticing a small and thin amount of drool slipping out of Kisame's mouth. Is he part of this? Itachi shook his head. That's Kisame Hoshigaki, my partner in the Akatsuki. He paused. I knocked him out. There was some silence again in the room and you could hear a pin drop. Then Naruto, Sakura and Jiraiya burst into laughter as Hiruzen and Kakashi chuckled, Itachi staring blankly with a twinkle in his eye, and Sasuke alone had a scowl on his face, struggling not to join in. After a while, Hiruzen stood and walked around his table to stand with everyone else. I believe that it is time for Itachi to leave. You see, Naruto, his mission was to capture you. Naruto raised his eyebrow, but obviously that isn't his aim. Yes, you are right, I've stayed longer than necessary. The older Uchiha nodded. Sasuke practically jumped up and stood in front of Itachi. You will explain everything, in excruciating detail. He grit his teeth together and knew that if he clenched them any harder, he would definitely be in pain. Itachi smiled at Sasuke's antics and tossed him a scroll from his pocket. He knew to bring it just in case he ran into his younger brother. Sasuke caught it with one hand and quirked an eyebrow at the Uchiha crest on the seal. Walking forward, Itachi raised his hand, pressing the tip of his finger against Sasuke's forehead. Maybe next time, little brother. After telling Itachi to stop going after Deidara, because he might be part of the group soon, they bid him farewell and watched as he swung Kisame over his shoulder again and walked out of the village, giving Kotetsu, who knew who he was now, and Izumo a shock. Jiraiya had updated Naruto on everything that was relevant to him. He told him how Itachi couldn't throw the Akatsuki off the Jinchuriki's trail for much longer, and how they all agreed to help Naruto relocate. And soon. You should tell them all. Jiraiya said, referring to telling the Jinchuriki, and whoever was in their little group, the information and other necessary things. Naruto nodded and called upon Sumi and the rest of his messenger foxes, directing them to each Jinchuriki's location. As Naruto and his team walked quickly to Naruto's apartment, they all started strategizing. Are you saying that we need to go, now? Sakura gasped and picked up the pace. Naruto shook his head, no. We don't need to leave now, but instead within the next couple of months or year. We need to start wrapping everything up here and do everything that he exhaled sharply, a village, needs to do, and learn it all. He knew that Yagura would help him somewhat on that part, but if he was a leader, then he couldn't leave everything to his subordinates, and anyway, he didn't even know if he was ready for that. But he couldn't think about those details now. He had to record how many people were going to join his village, who would help, mainly just everything which he had to do in order to revive Uzumaki. Uzumaki was abandoned anyway, and if he brought it back to life, perhaps the remaining Uzumaki were going to be naturally attracted to it. I need to be somewhere else, but you guys head to my apartment. Naruto tossed his house keys and a sealing scroll to Sakura, who caught them without batting an eyelash. She tilted her head. And where will you be? Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. The perv told me about some other, discarded and unwanted people. He sighed. I'm going to talk to Orochimaru, see what I can find out. Sasuke grimaced. I don't think that's a good idea. The snake may have been experimenting on some people who will turn out useful. Plus, Orochimaru is here, and they're probably still trapped somewhere. Naruto shook his head. It's not fair. I'll see you guys later. On that note, Naruto turned left and started walking down towards a place that he never really wanted to go to. You don't know anything about making a village. Naruto rolled his eyes at his Biju, who he hadn't heard from during the daytime recently. I'm well aware, that's why we're going to plan. Luckily, you've got some good people on your side, they can help. Yeah. Naruto clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his skin. Hopefully. When Sasuke and Sakura arrived by themselves at Naruto's rundown apartment, they cleared the dining table, well, the only table that Naruto had, and pulled out paper and unsealed the books from the scrolls that they gathered while in Uzumaki. Relax. Sasuke instructed Sakura, just like Naruto had made him relax when Itachi was with them. Sakura sighed and nodded. He knew stressing wouldn't improve the situation. It's just... I don't want to let Naruto down, you know? Sasuke grunted in agreement, pulling out a book. Alright, what do we know so far? Clearing her throat, Sakura started writing in small handwriting. We need a governing body. I'm assuming we're sticking with the classic Kage, daimyo, council, civilians, medics and military. Humming in agreement, Sasuke scanned the page he was reading. We'll be in Uzumaki, so I would say naming the person holding the highest position the Uzumaki, but I don't think the Uzumaki clan called their leader a Kage. He muttered. Flipping some further pages, who knew that we could find all of these books in that library? Any mention of a leader? Sakura questioned, turning a page in her own book. Sasuke pushed his book towards Sakura and pointed at a paragraph. Indeed. Ashina Uzumaki, a man who was the leader of the Uzumaki clan during the founding of Konoha. Leader, did they just call him a leader? Sakura ran a hand through her bright pink hair. When was the phrase, Kage, created? Well, Ashina and Hashirama Senju were friends, and he was the first Hokage at the time, but it seems like Uzumaki didn't use that phrase at all. Sasuke answered. Sakura put the book down and reached for her pen and paper. What about allies for trade and politics? Naruto has connections with Kirigakure and Yagura. We'll have to wait for the civil war to end though. We have Takagakure, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Due to A and Killer B, I'm sure Kumigakure is going to back us up, especially since B is coming with us to Uzumaki. Sasuke paused and let his teammate catch up. Sakura grunted to show that she had written all of that down. Continuing, Sasuke exhaled. We have the support of Suna, though I'm not sure who their current Kage is. I've heard rumors that they're going to be governed under a council until they train the next Kazekage. And obviously, Konoha. Sasuke nodded, yes, and obviously Konoha. They stopped, and both sighed in exasperation. Sakura faked cried and whined, slamming her head onto the desk and closing her eyes. This is going to be harder than I thought. You want to do what? The platinum blonde-haired girl stood with her arms crossed, staring at Naruto with an incredulous expression on her face. Naruto sighed, I want to talk to Orochimaru. Ino blinked at him again and then shook her head. Do you have permission from Hokage-sama? She challenged, knowing that he probably didn't, otherwise he wouldn't have to wait around, talking to her. Does Hokage-sama or Inoichi-san know that you're here, training your family jutsu on prisoners? Naruto raised an eyebrow and quirked the side of his lips into a small smirk. Seeing her stiffen and turn her head to the side in embarrassment made him feel a bit bad, because at least she was training, but he had to get through her somehow. Usually he would just walk through, but it seemed as if Ino had stolen the master key from somewhere, and that was the only way into Orochimaru's room. Sakura, Ino said simply. When she saw Naruto's curiosity, which usually was accompanied with his left eyebrow slightly lifted, and his lips in a small O shape, she continued. She's gotten stronger, and I've not done much since I've become a genin. She huffed, Sasuke-kun wouldn't want someone like me. Laughing, Naruto threw his head backwards, so that's what was on her mind. Romance-wise, I don't think Sasuke is interested in girls at the moment. He shrugged, and Sakura. She's stronger because she's been training and applying her skills in REA life situations. I haven't had many REA life situations come up. Ino glared at Naruto for blatantly telling her that she was weaker than her rival, which was true, but she didn't want to hear it from someone else. That's true. Naruto hummed. He unzipped his black jacket. The Kill Me orange jumpsuit was long gone, Ino noticed. When he first found out about Kurama, Naruto changed his clothing and now always wore black ninja pants, which were cut off just above his ankles, and an Anba-style black mesh shirt and jacket. Appreciating the view, Ino looked Naruto's chest up and down and then suddenly threw him the master key. Whatever, do what you want to do. Catching the keys, Naruto grinned. You wanted REA life situations, right? Come with me, I need information from Orochimaru, wanna help? He cheekily wagged his eyebrows in persuasion. Ino suddenly clasped her hands together and compared herself to Hinata in that moment. What? Me? You want my help? Spinning the keys with his index finger, Naruto put his hand on his hip and nodded. Come on, what else is better than practicing on a Sannin? Ino still looked unsure and uncomfortable. Naruto's smirk widened. Sasuke would be impressed. Unfortunate to say, but that got Ino flicking her ponytail behind her and replying, well, if you insist, I guess I should help you out. With a laugh, Naruto turned and unlocked the door with the master key that Ino had stolen. Before he pushed the door open, Ino had grabbed the hem of his jacket and pulled slightly. Turning his head slightly, he noticed that Ino had almost instantaneously let go and raised her hands up in defense. She was nervous. Naruto allowed a soft smile to cover his exasperation. Of course she was nervous. Naruto had fought and met Orochimaru multiple times, but Ino hadn't been in a situation before where she was in such a close proximity to any high-rank enemy ninja. Locking the door again, Naruto fully turned around and put his hands on her shoulders. Ino could have sworn that her blonde ex-classmate looked 10 years older, with a calm expression and kind smile on his lips. She could never look at him in a romantic light, but she could appreciate how much he had changed from their academy days, and that he was so much stronger. She didn't know the details about the Jinchuuriki Alliance, only the higher-ups and Team 7 knew. To be honest, all she had seen was Team 7 fighting and beating people to a pulp. The strange feeling that overwhelmed Ino had come to a halt and she sighed as it stopped. Coming to her senses, she blinked. What was that? She questioned. Naruto lifted his hands off her shoulders. My chakra, I wanted to get you to relax. He rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. Sorry, maybe I should have asked. Ino shook her head quickly. No, it was helpful. She cleared her throat. Anyway, what did you need from Orochimaru anyway? Naruto let out as he realized that he hadn't briefed Ino on what information they needed to extract. I need to find out where his hideout is. He's been experimenting on kids, and I wanted to save them. And find more Uzumakis, he thought to himself. I'll do some questioning, but if that doesn't work, could you enter his mind? Have a little look around? Ino bit her lip and nodded. There was one jutsu that she had been practicing a lot recently. It was the Shinenryu no Jutsu, mind invasion jutsu. It exhausted her, but it would do the job. I can, she stated in confidence. Naruto pat her head in comfort. Ino never realized it, but he had gradually gotten taller and towered over her. Wait here for a bit, he spoke. I'll call you in when it's time. Tilting her head to the side, she watched and Naruto waved and unlocked the door, walking inside. He turned to face the doorway and smiled at her as he pushed the door, but there was an unfamiliar red glint in his eyes as he shut it. Naruto heard a low chuckle from behind him. He turned and was faced with the chained-up figure of the snake Sannin, who was once so untouchable and powerful, but was now detained with chakra-absorbing shackles all over his body. Naruto Uzumaki, Orochimaru licked his lips. To what do I owe the pleasure? Pulling a chair from next to the doorway, he sat down directly in front of Orochimaru and lifted his right leg and swung it over his other leg. He leaned forward and rested his chin on his knee. Afternoon, Naruto greeted with boredom laced through his voice. I've come to ask for some information about your experiments. Orochimaru laughed, his shrill tone making a shiver go down through Naruto's spine in disgust. Interesting. The snake leaned forward, as much as the shackles allowed him to, coming almost nose to nose with the young Uzumaki Namikaze. How interesting. And why would you want to know about that? Naruto released some of the Kyuubi's chakra, letting it bubble into his multiple tails and envelop his figure. His eyes nearly glowed with crimson red, and paired with his bored expression, Orochimaru was ashamed to admit that he looked intimidating. But most of all, he looked like a mix between Minato and Kushina. The boy's appearance was practically a carbon copy of the Yandere Hokage, and the ability to use the nine-tailed fox's chakra was as if it was taken directly from Kushina's skill set, though it was clear that somehow the fox had allowed Naruto to use his chakra more directly, rather than just involuntarily when he is overwhelmed by emotions. Orochimaru scoffed, hating being in such a vulnerable and pitiful state in front of Minato's son. It was shameful and all he could do was act cocky. This kid was a child. Orochimaru wasn't scared in the slightest. I want to see what changes you made to their bodies. Naruto replied after a while. He didn't want to give too much information or seem like a hero in front of Orochimaru. He had to play along with the little game that they had started. He couldn't lose his composure, no matter how much he wanted to tear apart Orochimaru with his teeth for preying and experimenting on defenseless kids. Orochimaru hummed in thought, even more interesting. He smirked, I have caught many young people, ninja and civilians. He wiggled his fingers, his wrists being held up by the chains and shackles. How, I wonder, would you react if I said that I have an Uzumaki trapped somewhere there? The chakra surrounding Naruto's body lashed out and one of the tails attempted to hit Orochimaru's figure. Naruto stopped it and pulled Kyuubi's chakra back. He didn't need it to hit Orochimaru's face, it was only for intimidation purposes. He flexed his arm and cracked his knuckles. It was laughable, in fact, how defenseless Orochimaru was in this chained-up state. Naruto's fist landed on the pale man's cheek and his fingers wrapped around Orochimaru's neck, lifting him up from his feet and tightened gradually. You will tell me where your hideout is. Naruto ordered, his teeth gritting in pure, unadulterated loathing. Orochimaru winced and one of his eyes shut as he gasped for air. In between his sharp intakes, he slowly started chuckling but then choked again. Naruto's grip tightened and he released the older man's neck. Orochimaru dropped to the ground and stumbled trying to steady himself but inevitably fell to his knees. You're amusing. Orochimaru chuckled, breath hitching occasionally. I can see why someone as powerful as Yagura is so interested in you. Naruto looked down on him with hateful eyes, lips turning into a frown. He swung his fist directly into Orochimaru's stomach with an incredible amount of force which made the snake vomit up the bread and small amount of water that he received in the morning, laced with blood from the sheer power of the punch. You do not deserve to speak his name. Naruto grimaced, you will tell me where your hideout is, or I will destroy your mind. Snorting, Orochimaru raised his eyebrow at him and started chuckling again. Your threats need to be backed up with skill, Naruto-kun. I don't think you have the ability to destroy my mind. He retorted. I will never tell you where to find your kin, he smirked, You deserve to suffer, knowing that she is trapped and suffering, unable to be saved by you." That was the last straw for the young male Uzumaki. He growled and turned away. He walked towards the door and swung it open. He was met with Ino's small yelp. Ino could barely recognize Naruto. His eyes had transformed and became almost scarily dangerous. Naruto noticed her startled flinch and sighed, shutting his eyes for a few seconds and then opened them. His face had changed into a soft and kind expression, accompanied with a smile. "It's your turn to shine, Ino-chan." Naruto added the familiar honorific to comfort her as she stood up and nodded. Slowly stepping into the dark and dreary room, her eyes studied the hunched-over stature of the man who was once feared by most of the population of ninja in the world. Orochimaru now looked pitiful, and she almost felt sorry for him. Looking upwards, Orochimaru cackled as he saw the young Yamanaka. "Her? That tiny child is going to destroy my mind?" He smirked. "How's Inoichi Yamanaka? I gave him a good beating during the invasion. Has he regained feeling in his body yet?" Suddenly it all made sense. Ino's father, Inoichi, had been injured in the invasion battle and was on bed rest for a couple of weeks because he couldn't walk. When Ino asked how it happened, he just laughed and ruffled her hair, telling her not to worry about it, and that he was just happy to be alive, because apparently the person who did this would have been able to kill me. With his hands laced together behind his head, Naruto grinned. "You just keep angering people, don't you, Orochimaru?" Ino had strut forward with a look of detestation and placed her hand on his head. "You really shouldn't have said that," she said simply. "You really shouldn't have." Walking around Orochimaru, Naruto held down his shoulders so that he didn't thrash around. Ino shut her eyes and recited the words that she had practiced repeatedly. "Shinenryu no Jutsu, Mind Invasion Jutsu." Yagura, the fourth Mizukage, exhaled and leaned back in his Kage chair. He was surrounded by his most trusted comrades, Utakata, Zabuza and Haku. Zabuza and Haku had returned from a recon mission and were now back to help Yagura in the battle against the rebels. After the wave mission, Zabuza and Haku were given a choice, either to die, be missing means forever, or join Yagura again. Naturally, they joined Yagura and were shocked by how much he had changed from the days of the Bloody Mist. They chalked it up to meeting Naruto, that blonde boy who helped them, and also being snapped out of the dangerous trance that he sometimes was in. "I have decided on my next move." Yagura spoke with his commanding voice that they had grown used to. Utakata clasped his hands behind his back. "Care to share?" Standing, Yagura placed his hand on his desk and motioned to the guards, "Allow Mei Terumi to enter, we have things to discuss." Haku shut his eyes, nodding, and turned to open the door. Mei Terumi, a beautiful woman with long brown hair covering one of her eyes, entered the room. She also sported a blue dress, which was tailored to be easy to fight in. She walked forward and nodded hastily at Yagura. "Yagura-sama, what is this meeting about?" she questioned. Yagura, the Mizukage, and Mei Terumi, the leader of the rebels, in the past had multiple meetings to find a compromise to the situation at hand, but to no avail. Mei was surprised at the sudden summoning because they had not met so informally like this. Mei had began the revolution due to the violent methods that Kirigakure practiced, such as the graduation exam, which featured complete annihilation of classmates in order to become a genin, and also the general cold and chaotic nature of the village. Yagura greeted her and motioned for her to sit down in front of him. He rested back onto his seat and laced his fingers together in front of his face. "I have a proposition to make, and you have a choice." Mei straightened her back and quirked an eyebrow, curious about what Yagura was going to say. "Go ahead." Zabuza and Utakata exchanged confused glances. Usually Yagura confided in them and asked their opinions about his actions, but he hadn't talked to them at all about this. That usually meant that he was 100% sure about his decisions. However, even though it was good to know that he was certain about this, it was unnerving not being aware of what was occurring. "I will abdicate the Kage position." The sentence left everyone in shock and Mei's jaw fell open slightly. Haku flinched, Zabuza frowned and twitched while Utakata had slammed his hand down on the desk. "What are you talking about?" Abdicating his position meant that he would resign as Kage and meant that he was admitting to failing his duty as the Mizukage. Haku's mind started racing with thoughts and reasons why Yagura would be doing this, but he couldn't think of a reason why. The only thing that may have been a factor would be, yes. Haku smiled again. He had a feeling he knew what was about to happen. Yagura held his hand up to silence his fellow Jinchuriki and turned back to Meiterumi. I am not finished. Utakata gulped and composed himself. I will resign, and you will become the Godaime Mizukage. You will control all of Kirigakure. I will have no power here politically. Mei's eyes narrowed. This was what she wanted all along, and Yagura was giving it to her this easily? What's the catch? Yagura smirked and leaned back in his chair, understanding why Mei was a leader. In exchange, when the time comes, you will aid a village which is in the process of being created. Nothing much, just trade, political aid, and military aid if needed. He tapped his fingers on the desk, quiet taps as he glanced back up at Mei. It will not be soon, but perhaps in the next year or so. When Yagura finished, Mei thought about all of the different scenarios which could occur and if it would damage her reputation, Kirigakure, and overall if it was worth it. It didn't take long, but she had decided. I accept. Yagura stood and extended his hand, removing his Mizukage hat and handing it over to Meiterumi, feeling a weight lifted off his shoulders. The new Mizukage took the hat and stood up too, smiling. He smiled at the astonished expression plastered on Mei's face. Pleasure doing business with you, Godaime Mizukage-sama. With her hands behind her back, Ino Yamanaka awkwardly fiddled with her fingers while staring at the dubious expression of her rival, Sakura Haruno. She sent small glances towards Sasuke's direction, who had rolled his eyes and started flipping through the paper in a small notebook in front of him. Come on guys. Naruto grinned. He pat Ino's back, who nearly fell forward from the surprising force. She caught herself and then instantly straightened her back and pursed her lips, reminding herself not to look weak, and instead to be strong and confident. But why her? Sakura drawled, the disgust clear in her tone of voice. It made Ino wince as, of course they hated each other, but Sakura had never had that much venom in her words. Ichin. Sasuke grunted, also not understanding why Naruto wanted to add another person to the group. Naruto sighed and placed his hands on his hips, because he practically sang, I think Ino-chan can help us out, using her family jutsu. Plus, she's been hanging around Shikamaru, so I'm sure her strategy skills have improved too. The platinum-haired blonde girl nodded fervently, yeah. I can be helpful. Naruto Baka, Sakura and Sasuke shot a dangerous glare at Ino, who instantly paused and repeated herself. Naruto, already filled me in on all of the Jinchuriki stuff. I think it's a great and clever idea. Plus, Konoha is starting to bore me. She flicked her hair. Naruto noticed the change in manners instantly. Of course the last time any of the other Konoha genin knew him properly was in the academy, and in the Chunin exams, but the latter didn't leave much time to have a decent conversation, you know, in between being attacked left, right and center. Sasuke placed his notebook down and looked up at Ino with a sharp gaze. Perhaps she can be helpful. He started. But she can also bring us down. Ino flinched. I don't want her here, but, Sakura sighed, I can admit that she can be smart at times. So, how about you guys tell us what happened with Orochimaru, and we can plan our next move. You already told her everything anyway, Sasuke grumbled, you're too trusting, idiot Naruto. With Ino's curious glance to Sakura, at the fact that Sasuke could insult Naruto but she couldn't, Sakura just waved her hand, mouthing that's just what they do. Naruto snickered and scratched his cheek. Anyway, we went to find out where Orochimaru's experimentation lab is, and using Ino-chan's. Please stop calling me Chan. It feels weird. Ino shook her head. Alright. Using Ino's Yamanaka family jutsu, we managed to find out where it is. His expression darkened. There's an Uzumaki there. Ino nodded sadly while Sakura gasped. Sasuke clenched his fist and bit the inside of his cheek. As a person who only has one family member left, He knew that this was going to be important to Naruto. Clearing his throat, Naruto smiled again. So, we need to go. Or, more specifically, I need to go. You are not going alone. Sakura snapped. I'm not gonna, Naruto replied. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled while he crossed his arms. I'm taking some of the Jinchuriki. You guys are staying. Fuck no. Sasuke slammed his hand down on the table. Sakura scoffed at the thought of being left behind and Ino narrowed her eyes at Naruto. Taking a leaf out of Kakashi's book, Naruto smiled with his eyes closed. This led a small feeling of killing intent to seep out of his skin as the three backed down and were forced to relax. As I was saying, you guys are staying here. Naruto finished. He noticed that his three friends were not happy with his decision, so he smiled softly again. Look, this will be dangerous. He raised a hand to stop Sakura from interrupting, and I know you guys think you can handle it, but I don't know what it's going to be like. What are you going to do with the rescued people once you get in? Ino asked. Naruto hummed in thought. Well, I was going to ask Gaara, Fu, and maybe Yagura to help me. You're right, it's not like we can bring all of the people we saved back to Konoha, so maybe Gaara will take some to Suna, Yagura might take some to Kiri, and Fu to Taki. I suppose that is. Sasuke frowned. Acceptable. He was beyond pissed off, but Naruto was right. They didn't know whether or not Orochimaru had people stationed at the lab, so they might as well take the Jinchuriki, who are stronger than any of the Konoha genin. Meanwhile, I'd like you guys to continue your work here. The young Uzumaki straightened his back and crossed his legs. Speaking of, got any ideas so far? Sakura perked up and looked excitedly at Sasuke, who sighed with a small smile and motioned for her to start. Ino tilted her head. She had no idea what was going on. Sakura clapped her hands together. Okay. We have about a year, so during that time we need to implement a strict training regimen as we are going to need 3 specialized military groups. Aside from the general population that you're going to get, we need a tracking and information team, a stealth and assassination team, and like it, Sakura started punching the air, a hard-hitting front lines kinda team. Ino grinned. Oh, coming up with the names of these teams are going to be so much fun. Sakura nodded enthusiastically. We need a daimyo, in order to be recognized as an official country or hidden village. So you need someone you trust. Sasuke added calmly. As for the leader's name, something like Yuzukage, or Yuzushiokage, or, he rolled his eyes, I don't know, but I haven't found evidence of the leader of Yuzushiogakure being called Kage or anything of the sort. Naruto waved his hand in dismissal. Names can wait. He grinned. Let's leave that to the girls, they're way more creative than us. Sasuke nodded in agreement. Sakura and Ino giggled together. After a second, Sakura paused and realized how natural being back with Ino felt. It had been years due to their rivalry, but since she's done with chasing after Sasuke, why couldn't they just continue where they left off? Naruto stood up and rolled his shoulders back and rubbed his neck. I'm tired. I'll go have a chat to the Jinchuriki, see how soon we can head out to Orochimaru's lab. He turned around, and as he was just about to leave, he froze. His eyes widened and he ran back to Ino and clenched his teeth at her. Where did you put the master key? Ino blinked and then her eyes widened. What? Naruto growled, did you leave it in front of Orochimaru's cell? Jumping to her feet, Ino gasped, shit! What key? Sakura questioned in confusion. Naruto punched his table, shit! Come on! He grabbed all 3 of the people in front of him and grit his teeth. Shunshin! He held his hands in the tiger seal and they disappeared in an instant. It was difficult to use the body flicker jutsu with multiple people, but the jutsu itself depended on the amount of chakra required, as well as the overall distance he needed to travel. This much wasn't painful to Naruto, but as he brought 3 extra people along without thinking, he was slightly winded. They opened their eyes as they stood in front of Orochimaru's cell. Sakura let out a sigh of relief as she saw the shadowy figure hunched over inside the dark room, but Naruto's leaking chakra reminded her that something was wrong. Orochimaru was held up by the shackles, which were chained to different directions of the room, so it left Orochimaru with his legs and arms spread, so there was no chance of him making any hand seals. Of course, there were also chakra suppressors. What was peculiar though, was the fact that he was hunched over to the extent that his knees were almost touching the floor. His feet were limp, and so were his arms. Naruto walked forward with clenched hands as he grabbed Orochimaru's head, fist full of long black hair. He pushed Orochimaru's head backwards and was met with cold, empty eyes, rolled to the back of the snake's pale head. Mouth slightly ajar. A blank expression on his face. Neck slit with a sharp kunai, blood was dripping down and seeping through his clothes, leaving a puddle of crimson red around the two figures. Sasuke's eyes widened, Sakura's breath hitched, Ino gasped and turned to ran down the hall. Guards! Guards! Someone get here now! Naruto stood in a pool of Orochimaru's blood, his shoes slowly becoming tinted with the disgusting red liquid. He dropped his grip on Orochimaru's head and turned to face Sasuke and Sakura. As he turned, his teammates saw the look of sheer desperation mixed with anger and helplessness plastered on his face. He was angry with himself for making such a stupid mistake. Orochimaru was the source of information for the village, and because of the stupid mistake that Ino and Naruto made, someone had killed him. Someone had killed Orochimaru. Someone. Naruto's eyes widened. Of course, many people hate Orochimaru, but it was under strict orders from the Hokage to keep him prisoner. He wasn't going to be killed for a long time. But who would want Orochimaru dead now, of all times? He gasped, "Fuck!" Of course. As he hit realization, he yelled, "We've got an enemy ninja in the village." He decided to leave Sasuke and Sakura there, because they would be fine, they would be safe. But him, Naruto, would not be. He used the Shunshin Jutsu to flicker into the Hokage's office and was greeted with confused expressions from Jonin, who were apparently in a meeting with Hiruzen. "Naruto-kun? This is a private meeting, what's wrong dash?" The young Uzumaki wanted to punch something. "I think the leader of the Akatsuki just killed Orochimaru." After discussing everything that just happened with Orochimaru, the village went into lockdown. On the slight chance that the leader of the Akatsuki, who according to Itachi was Obito Uchiha, was still in the village, they would have to be on high alert. They confined Naruto in his apartment alone, his teammates were sent home. Naruto itched to move around, he didn't do well sitting down and strategizing, that was one thing that hadn't changed. "I don't know why they are confining you here. I can't sense him at all." The grumbling low voice of Kyuubi exploded in Naruto's mind. "Kami! You scared me. Where have you been? And why didn't you tell me that Obito was here? Wasn't he the one who released you all those years ago?" Naruto thought angrily, what good was a giant massive chakra being if it couldn't even inform you of danger? "I was sleeping." Yeah, Naruto was annoyed. "Anyway, I sense Isabu close by." This made Naruto perk up. Isabu being close by meant that Yagura was here. Why was Yagura here? He was going to contact him anyway, but he hadn't had time. He just shrugged and didn't question it. Maybe it's just a subconscious Jinchuriki thing. Naruto's apartment was under protective guard, but Yagura instantly used Shunshin to appear in Naruto's room. The said ex-Mizukage exhaled and looked around, eyes landing on Naruto, and he smiled slightly. "Hello kid, how are you?" Naruto took a moment to study Yagura's body. He was wearing his usual clothing with his long staff towering over him, the minimal dark circles which usually haunted under his eyes had disappeared, so clearly he had become less stressed. Naruto stood up and grinned, walking forward to the short boy and engulfed him in a hug. "Yagura! Well, Obito just attacking Konoha to kill Orochimaru, but other than that, I'm great." He released the stiff boy and pulled up a chair for them to sit. "You look refreshed, how are you?" He paused and then lightly glared, "Also don't call me kid. Yagura chuckled and leaned his staff on the table. "I have made a move," he explained, eyes flashing, and Naruto suddenly felt as if a chess piece from the Jinchuriki's side was moved forward against the Akatsuki. I'm no longer Mizukage, I gave the position to Mei Terumi. Naruto's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The leader of the rebels? Indeed. Yagura nodded, I believe that my time in Kirigakure has come to an end. Instead, it's my duty to help you prepare your plans. Leaning forward, Naruto supported his chin on his intertwined hands. Go on. He motioned. You're going to be our leader, so you need to get stronger and quickly. Yagura shrugged, you are weak at the moment, in comparison to some of the other Jinchuriki, namely Killer Bee, Han, and I. Naruto frowned but acknowledged that it was the truth. You are only 13. I will teach you in the ways of politics, I shall also oversee your training, but B will be the main one teaching you as you have similar styles. Naruto hummed in agreement, we need to also go to Orochimaru's lab as soon as possible, there is an Uzumaki there that I need to rescue, and also I want to save the other people that the snake has tortured. He spat. I was thinking that you could take some of the kids to Kiri and train them. Yagura nodded, yes, I can ask Zabuza to do it. Cracking a smile, Naruto asked, how is that sword-loving demon? And Haku? They're my most trusted advisors. Yagura smiled calmly. Suddenly, a smirk grew on Naruto's face, speaking of advisors. He leaned forward and cheekily wagged his eyebrows at Yagura. The ex-Mizukage straightened his back uncomfortably. Whenever Naruto had that expression, the Jinchuriki knew that he was up to no good. It's always a little bit too close for comfort for Yagura, but he needed to get used to it considering Fu and Naruto didn't know the concept of personal space. When we fix up Uzushio, would you like to be the daimyo, and my main advisor? Yagura chuckled and visibly relaxed, politics is my speciality, after all. So? Naruto pressed. He tapped the table with his slender fingers, gaze sliding upwards to meet Naruto's eyes with a small smirk of his own. If my leader requests it, of course I would. I'd be honored. After thoroughly searching for Madara, or Obito, or whoever the leader of the Akatsuki was, Naruto furiously thought in confusion, and finding that he was nowhere to be found, the lockdown on the village was revoked. This meant that Naruto and Yagura could start getting ready to leave the village and find Orochimaru's lab and hideout. Through Ino's jutsu, they discovered that it was in Otogakure, which was now in slight chaos after Orochimaru's capture and the invasion. However, Naruto had a feeling that the Obito, if that's who the leader truly was, as Itachi said, probably tied up loose ends in Oto. He just hoped that he didn't know about the underground lab. There was a special access code that Naruto also given by Ino, so it just counted on his luck. When we are nearing Otogakure, I shall call Fu and Gaara. Yagura looked up at Naruto and smiled, did you hear that Gaara is being trained for the next Kazekage position? Wide-eyed, Naruto exclaimed in awe, what? That's so cool. He grinned, I'll have to give him a massive hug when I see him. Yagura shivered at the thought and pitied their red-headed Jinchuriki friend. Only Yagura and Gaara were not completely used to Naruto and Fu's familiarity when it came to human contact. He smiled falsely and pat Naruto on the back, come on, let's shunshin to the gates. After they did exactly that, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki animatedly described the scene of seeing Orochimaru dead to Kotetsu and Izumo, who were woeing and awing, hanging on to his every word and interrupting only to ask questions. When Naruto signed out in the little notebook, and told them to notify the Hokage that he was heading out, they simply winked and gave him a thumbs up. Ah! I wish we could get some cool gate guards like them when we redo Uzushio. Naruto chuckled as they started jumping from tree to tree. They could have kept on using Shunshin for short distance travel, but even though they were Jinchuriki, they couldn't just waste their chakra. Yagura and Naruto didn't really know what they would be greeted by when they arrived in Otogakure, so they couldn't be careless. They seem nice. Yagura commented simply. Otogakure was situated north of Konoha, not particularly far, and Naruto guessed that was why Orochimaru chose to re-establish it and make it his hideout. It must have been easy to spy from there and plan the invasion. Naruto put his right hand up into a tiger seal and widened his chakra exposure. Uzumakis naturally were sensory ninja, and on top of his fuinjutsu skills, he was able to spread out threads of his chakra and locate people whose chakra he was familiar with. This was mentally taxing, of course, depending on how much chakra he used, but it was necessary. He increased his chakra and used the Jinchuuriki mental link to find and speak to Gaara and Fu. "Naruto, here, can you guys hear me?" he thought, wincing slightly as he nearly tripped on a branch. He was male, he couldn't multitask well sometimes. "Affirmative." Gaara's deep voice boomed through Naruto's mind. "Fu here." Yagura nodded to Naruto and they continued jumping from each branch to another. "What's your ETA?" Maybe 10 or so minutes, Su." Fu reported, her usual habit of ending her sentences with "Su" attached. Naruto hadn't heard it for a while, but somehow he was comforted by it. Perhaps it was just the familiarity of being with his fellow Jinchuuriki just helped him relax, not that being with other people wasn't comfortable, but it was rare to find such a literal bond with other people, much less 8 other people. The only other people he had a strong bond with was Sakura and Sasuke, and Iruka, although he hadn't talked to him in a while. Naruto made a mental note to drop by the academy and invite Iruka to eat some ramen. "Let's hurry," Yagura ordered, "we should aim to arrive at the same time to prevent any ambushes." Naruto agreed and they silently raced towards Otogakure and their friends. Standing in front of a run-down building, Fu gripped Naruto's sleeve as she frowned. "It looks so creepy," she complained. Naruto chuckled and ruffled her hair lightly. Yagura started walking forward. "Let's go, we have a lot of space to cover." Naruto, Gaara and Fu followed the older man, the Uzumaki extending his chakra threads around the complicated maze-like system of rooms and corridors so that he would understand the general gist of the blueprints. They paced forward, making note of each room and peeking inside individually, thus far only being greeted by silence. When they had first reached Oto, they found that the surroundings had been flattened and leveled, as if someone had destroyed the other buildings. Naruto thought that this was either due to chaos or rioting, since Orochimaru hadn't come back after the invasion, or Obito had cleaned up Orochimaru's mess. Luckily, it seemed like Obito didn't know the entry code of the experimentation lab. He really should properly thank Ino for her help, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to do this. "There are a few strong chakra presences here," Gaara noted, pointing to the left. Naruto narrowed his eyes. "Like Yagura said, there's too much space to cover, let's split up." Fu huffed but nodded. "Use the Jinchuuriki mental link, retrieve everyone, let me know if there are any special cases." Inclining his head in acknowledgement, Yagura shunshined away while Gaara used his san to float. It was a good method since no one would be able to hear his footsteps, and he wouldn't leave a trace. "I've never been on a retrieval mission before, Su." Fu grinned. She mock saluted and her small, thin, reddish-orange wings extended out of her back, the green flash fluttering away, aiding her speed as she disappeared. When Fu became excited, or used certain jutsu, she was able to use wings that looked similar to Komiai's wings, the Seven Tails Biju. It was a pretty recent development, as she could control Komiai's chakra better. Smiling to himself, Naruto shook his head and quietly tread down the left corridor where Gaara signaled him to go. It seemed as if lots of the rooms were empty, and eventually his eyes widened as he stood outside one particular room, with multiple chakra signatures inside it. He exhaled and tried to open the door, it was locked. Rolling his eyes, he pumped some chakra into his right hand and broke through the lock. Opening the door, his heart almost melted at the sight of 6 little children. They must have been maybe 9 or 10 years old. They wore dirty rags and glanced up at him with wide eyes. "That fucking, disgusting snake." One little girl smiled, her overgrown brown hair covering some of her eyes. "Oniai-san, are you going to take us away?" Upon further inspection, Naruto saw that all of them were chained to the wall, an empty tray in front of them. He almost felt sick. "Yes." He strode forward and smashed the chains to pieces. The kids gasped in awe. "You guys going to be alright now?" Naruto grit his teeth. How revolting of a human being does one have to be to kidnap and experiment on children? He knew that children had the most flexible and moldable chakra systems, as well as the ability to recover from some of the experiments that Orochimaru probably put them through, but it didn't mean that such innocent kids had to go through pain and torture just to be used by a creepy snake. Sense anything, Kyo? Naruto thought as he broke through the rest of the chains and directed the kids to go towards the exit, but to stay there and wait for the other big sister and big brothers. There was a brief grunt. There are too many confusing chakra signatures, like different clan chakras and blood being mixed together. I can't hone in on a specific one. Naruto sighed and manually stood outside each room to sense whether the person inside held a familiar chakra signature. Uzumaki's, as sensory ninja, had that ability. I've got an interesting boy. Yagura spoke, maybe around 15 or 16 years old. I'm gathering the other children. Where should I make them go? To the door that we entered through, but make them wait there. We have a lot to get through. Naruto replied, finding another room full of kids and setting them free. There's a cool-looking boy here. He's like turning himself into water and then becoming solid again. Fu's voice giggled through the mental connection. Naruto furrowed his brows. That was a strange ability to have. He can't get out of the chains though. Give me 5 minutes. Gaara's voice instantly scoffed. Keep him away from me. My sand will become heavy and wet. Sand and water aren't going to mix well. Such a child. Naruto chuckled. No. Gaara responded, I'm trying to be smart. What if there's an ambush? My sand will be useless. Right. Naruto rolled his eyes with a grin. I'm older than you, don't call me a child. Naruto pouted, well, I'm the leader. I'm training to be Kazekage. Naruto grumbled and admitted defeat. Fu giggled while Yagura sighed, that teenagers will be teenagers sigh, you know? After some more walking around and setting kids free, Naruto felt a small sliver of electricity shoot up his spine. His stomach felt warm and instantly he extended his chakra out so he could find the source of the sensation. 15 meters forward, turn right and it's the second door on the left. Naruto cracked a grin and started running, thanks Kurama. As he swung open the door, ready to meet his relative, all he was greeted with instead was a young girl, about his age, in the middle of putting on a shirt. Naruto paused and blinked, frozen in his spot. The red-headed girl was turned away, her glasses about to fall off the bridge of her nose in shock. There was an array of half-moon marks on her back, arms and shoulders. There were numerous indents, and they looked like they really hurt. One side of her hair was spiked up, and the other was limp and straight. Naruto studied her for a second. Her red hair and crimson eyes were characteristic of a typical Uzumaki, as Kurama had told him long ago. She yelped and quickly pulled her shirt on and did the top button. Swinging around, she removed a small knife from the side of her glasses and chucked it at Naruto with scarily good aim and speed. Naruto, still in shock, allowed himself to briefly step to the side and let the knife embed itself into the brick wall behind him. He walked forward and closed the door. Who the fuck are you? The female Uzumaki yelled and scrambled to get as far away as possible. Naruto didn't respond and grabbed her wrist, pinning her to the wall and stared straight into her eyes to study her further. Her face flushed and she struggled to get him off. Look at my chakra, he said seriously, both hands still pinning hers to the wall. The girl started shaking. The position was suggestive enough, but this random boy who entered her room was now telling her to do what? As per his commands, she shut her eyes for a second and then snapped them open again. All she could see was bright blue chakra, surrounding a red core in his stomach. She moaned as this mysterious boy's chakra overwhelmed her and seeped into her body. I can't use medical jutsu, but I can give you my chakra, the marks will heal. Naruto let go of her wrists when he was done and the girl's knees buckled and gave way. Naruto caught her and set her down on the cheaply made bed. As she gasped to regain her breath, she held her head in her hands. Who are you? She wheezed, ears red from her embarrassing reaction to his chakra. Grinning, Naruto leaned his chin on his palm. I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, I've come to rescue you. The girl blushed when she realized that they were related. What's your name? Karen. She mumbled, Karen Uzumaki. She perked up, how can you be an Uzumaki? I thought I was the only one. Mother said that they were all gone. Frowning, Naruto exhaled, no, there are a few scattered around I think. My mother was an Uzumaki. Karen's eyes narrowed, and your dad was Minato Namikaze? Raising his eyebrow, Naruto smirked, perceptive. Yes, he was. He stood up and extending his hand, waiting until Karen grasped it and also stood. What if I don't need rescuing? She put her hands on her hips, Orochimaru put me in charge of the southern hideout. She boasted. Naruto grimaced, so you support Orochimaru experimenting and torturing children? Her shoulders dropped and her expression became visibly downcast. Her hands fell from her hips, no. She shook her head, no I don't. I want to get out of here. The blonde Uzumaki saw her expression and awkwardly pat her head. He always did that to people who seemed younger than him. He wasn't great at comforting, or emotions in general, but Fu and Sakura always seemed to enjoy him patting their heads. Karen stiffened and Naruto realized that it had been a while since she was around friendly human contact. Then let's go. She didn't have any chains on her, seemingly because she was the boss here if Orochimaru wasn't present, so they walked out of the room and started freeing the other young children. Ah, there are some people my age around here too, can they come too? Karen insisted. Naruto laughed at her nervous question, obviously. Although, I think my friends have already found them. Come on. He motioned for Karen to follow him after they had finished their rounds, but instead simply followed the red-headed Uzumaki as she obviously knew where she was going. Is that everyone? Gaara was sitting on his sand, eye twitching as about 15 little children were standing around him, some on top of the sand, some playing with the sand, and one hanging from Gaara's arm and laughing. Fu burst out laughing, you look like a babysitter. I think you found your true calling, Gaara. Yagura chuckled and walked forward from the dark corridor, a tall and muscly orange-haired boy trailing behind him nervously. Next to him was another boy. Suigetsu. Where have you been? Karen ran forward and clenched her fist, hitting the boy with light blue tinted white hair. He groaned and rubbed his cheek where Karen punched. Gah, quit your bitching, Karen. Karen's face became the same shade as her crimson locks as she turned and folded her arms. Naruto chuckled. Let's leave, you all shouldn't have to stay here for another second. And who the hell are you? Suigetsu scowled, sparing a small glance at the orange-haired older boy who was standing next to him. Hey, Jugo, are you even stable right now? Yagura tilted his head to the side. Young Jugo told me about his condition, he'll be coming with me so I can keep it under control. Fu batted her lashes, Suigetsu-kun, don't be rude to Neru-kun. He's like, she started punching the air, our leader. Suigetsu raised his eyebrow, and the Mizukage isn't. Ex-Mizukage. Yagura quipped. All will be explained soon. Naruto threw his arm over Karen's shoulders, who jumped and stiffened slightly for a couple of seconds until she relaxed. Naruto scratched the back of his head. I'm Naruto, for now, let's get out of here. They had decided as they left that half of the children would go back to Suna with Gaara, and the other half would go back to Takagakure with Fu. Yagura would take Suigetsu and Jugo back to Kirigakure with him. Suigetsu was almost vibrating from excitement to meet Zabuza, who was part of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. It was his dream to join them as a child, but now he wanted to gather all of the swords and create his own group. Jugo was introverted, so didn't say much except answering a couple of questions about his time with Orochimaru. While walking back, Karen animatedly talked to Naruto about their family. Naruto answered with just as much enthusiasm and told her about his plan to revive Uzushiogakure. Her jaw almost hit the ground as she yelled, "We have a village?" One little girl was sticking to Gaara and didn't let him go, so he sighed and gave in to her puppy dog eyes. He let her float on top of his son next to him. Giddy, she clapped her hands together and started singing songs with Fu, who looked completely in her element, and the other kids. These are the future residents of Uzushio. Naruto smiled to himself and clutched the front of his chest. I feel warm. He didn't even notice the shadow sinking into the grass behind him. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.